Eva. Good morning, everyone. Well, depends on where you're coming from. Good morning on my side of the world. Welcome to this week's A Practical SQL Server HA&DR show. Today's format's a little bit different. Instead of the usual Q&A, where you submit your questions and then I will answer them, I decide to do a little bit of a presentation for this because I've seen, in fact, I was just emailing one of my clients where it's one of those frustrations that people and DBAs and sysadmins or anybody taking care of highly available infrastructures, where you decide to come up with a high availability solution, but it doesn't work like the way you expect it to work. And that's why I kind of decided to change the format a bit so that it will give you some insights as to what exactly is high availability, what it is for, and how can you leverage it. My name is Edwin Sarmiento. If you've been following me for quite a while, my name, well, not my name, but I've been a Microsoft Certified Master for quite a while, and my key area of expertise is high availability. And by the way, if you are joining in from either YouTube, Twitter, or LinkedIn, say hi. From your side of the world, say hi. And while I'm doing this, I hope I can switch back and forth between my slide deck and the chat window. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Share screen, there you are. And not the Chrome tab, but there. I'm gonna share my slide real quick. And this is all about high availability basics for the DBA. And like I said, people have different definitions of high availability. And the most frustrating thing is that you come up with a solution and it doesn't work. Yes, I've seen it happen so many times where, in fact, I was just talking to another client where they've abandoned their availability group solution. And again, for SQL Server high availability in general, they've abandoned their always-on availability group solution because it was causing more problems than it solves. Have you ever been in that kind of situation where you thought something is going to solve your major problem, but then you end up having more problems than you anticipated? And what ends up happening is that you're scrambling, trying to find another solution to the problems induced by this particular solution that you thought is going to solve your problem. And that is what this is all about, right? And I want to start off by taking a poll. Put your comments in the, again, if you're joining in from LinkedIn or YouTube, post your comments or your responses. I'd like this to be interactive. Have you ever deployed a high availability solution thinking that it is going to provide high availability to your infrastructure, and then realizing that it is causing more outages than you've ever imagined? Okay, it's one of those cases where you were given an assignment, you were given a responsibility to design a high availability solution, and then you realized, hey, Allah and Narsing, have you ever been assigned to deploy a high availability solution, and then after deployment, you're getting more outages, you're experiencing more issues, right? Have you ever been given the responsibility to manage an always-on availability solution, or any high availability solution for that matter? Somebody built it, they gave you the responsibility to take care of it, but because you're not aware of what is going on, you kind of you're shooting in the dark, and you don't know what is going on, but you're now responsible for it. Okay, and this is what I wanted to set the stage for, is that again, so many high availability solutions are out there. Maybe you've deployed one yourself. Maybe somebody else did it, and then you were given the responsibility to take good care of it. But now it's like, I don't know exactly how to manage this. And understanding how high availability works from not just the technology features, but from the ground up. Like, what is it all about? I want to go back and share my story back in 2008 when we moved here in Canada. I've had the opportunity to move here. I come from a tropical country, and we didn't have snow. All I knew was wet and dry seasons. And so coming here was such an amazing opportunity, because now I get to experience seasons. winter like what we have right now, and then we have spring, summer, and fall. No, I'm not going to burst into that James Taylor song if you're thinking about it. This is one of those, I want to say, privileges of living in North America. You get to experience different seasons that I've never had the opportunity to experience prior to moving here. And one of the things that I need to prepare for was the winter season. We got here sometime November, and it is starting to get cold. Now, my understanding was, okay, cold, how cold is cold? So we started preparing for winter clothes. But the thing that I did not anticipate was how much snow we are going to experience. Right now, it's snowing outside. It is sunny. The good thing about that, it is sunny, but my driveway is covered in snow. Right now, it's about 4 or 5 inches of snow. A couple of weeks ago, we had like 2.5 feet of snow. And so I started searching for snowblowers. Snowblowers because, well, I could start with shovels, but then what if, you had 2.5 feet of snow? And then, the search, probably same thing as you are when you get into this searches for the things that you need. The internet is going to drive you to the deepest holes of whatever that product you're trying to look for. In my case, it's the snowblower. And it's interesting how, all of these snowblowers will have different features like dual headlights, just in case you decide to shovel or clear your driveway at 3 o'clock in the morning when you got paged because your monitoring tool starts telling you that there's something wrong, just in case. Or that heated hand grips, just in case you decide to go out and shovel your driveway and you forgot to put on hand gloves. Or that one-touch electric chute control, like one touch with all of these fancy gadgets on your dashboard, like even the in-dash remote pitch control. You know how people are now starting to introduce iPad-style touchscreen controls on just about anything. Just go see a Tesla. And then the automated robotic snowblower. And this is all of the features. And as I was looking at the snowblower, I kind of think this is similar to how we deploy SQL Server high availability solutions. And the thing about high availability solutions, specifically with SQL Server, is that we focus so much on the features. In fact, when somebody wants high availability, they start to look at what features does SQL Server have. And again, you can apply this to just about anything. What feature does Windows has? What feature does Oracle have? What feature does MySQL have? And we've been focused on the features that we kind of fixate on the features instead of really understanding what high availability is all about. And so we look at all of the features throughout SQL Server's lifespan. We started off with failover clustering and database mirroring from 2008 and earlier. Of course, we're not discounting log shipping and backup, copy, and restore, but those are not high availability solutions. Those are more for disaster recovery. And then SQL Server 2012 introduced always-on availability groups, and with Windows support, deploying multi-subnet failover clusters that span across different data centers. And then you have 2014, where Microsoft improved availability groups, particularly the read-only routing capabilities. And then 2016, another improvement on availability groups, where you have the load balancing of read-only secondaries, you rerouting them evenly across all replicas. And then 2017 with SQL Server on Linux, or running SQL Server on Docker containers. A lot of people think, how is SQL Server Linux a high availability solution? Well, as far as I'm concerned, if nobody wants to touch it, it's highly available, right? Because it's on Linux, and most SQL Server DBAs are not familiar with the command line. So if nobody wants to touch it, it's highly available, right? And then 2019, when you start looking at deploying SQL Server on Kubernetes. Ankush, welcome to today, and thanks for joining us. The thing is, we have been so fixated on the features. Like when you get into a conversation with tech professionals, SQL Server DBA sysadmins, who want to deploy a high availability solution, this is what is immediately looked on. In fact, I kind of predict how SQL Server DBAs would behave when the conversation about high availability comes in. They code to the Microsoft documentation. They look at the version of SQL Server that they're deploying, and they will look at the features that are available. That's kind of how a typical SQL Server DBA would get into the high availability conversation, especially if they're the one responsible for designing it. Like they're designing it and then they're going to be the ones deploying it. Same thing with consultants. They would go and look at the version of SQL Server in Windows sometimes. They would go to the Microsoft documentation. They would look at the edition. Of course, there are limitations with the editions. And then they will look at the features. But before we even talk about the features, let's talk about the basics. Let's get back into the basics. Because this will determine whether or not your solution is indeed highly available. Okay? What are these? First, let's define what high availability means. A good definition should be the starting point of anything that you're going to do. I was just having a sales call with another customer a couple of weeks ago where we were even trying to define what high availability is. They already have a solution in place. They actually have an always-on availability group solution, but they can't even decide on the definition of what high availability is. I grabbed this definition from James Lutke. I don't want to butcher his last name. His book from way back 2008, Pro SQL Server Disaster Recovery. And high availability is the process of ensuring, making sure that systems remain available. I want you to keep track of that phrase. Remain available as long as possible, no matter what the cause. Okay? No matter what the cause might be for downtime. And I'm highlighting a phrase here, remain available as long as possible. Park that phrase for a side because we're going to come back to it later. Then I grabbed another definition from Tech Target from Ben Lutkevich. Hopefully I didn't butcher that last name. For him, high availability is the ability of a system to operate continuously without failing for a designated period of time. And I also highlighted a phrase here, designated period of time. Okay. In those two definitions, there's a key theme. I actually gave it away by highlighting the phrases. And the theme on both definitions is time. Time is the key theme on both definitions for high availability. So much so that we really need to focus on the time aspect of a high availability solution. Okay? And this is why I said you have to start with the definition first. Because unless everybody on your team, your managers, the stakeholders, the people making decisions, unless we're all clear on what the definition is, then you are all going to argue about whether the solution is valid, whether this solution works, and that's basically it, right? There are metrics that the industry would tell you about high availability. You go do a Google or Bing or whatever kind of search engine you're using. You can do a quick internet search. Yeah, that's the generic term. And find out what these metrics are. And these are common every time you have these conversations with people who want to build high availability solutions. The first one is the percentage of uptime. And this is typically measured in terms of the nines. This is the percentage of time that a system is fully operational. That's why you hear people drop nines, 3 nines, 4 nines, 5 nines. But unless you're really clear about what these nines really mean, people will just drop terms. In fact, I keep hearing CIOs and CTOs and CEOs talk about zero downtime and zero data loss. There is nothing in here that says 0. It says nines. Because there is no such thing as zero downtime and zero data loss. If you disagree with that, blame physics. There is no such thing as zero downtime and zero data loss. That's just physics. Okay, and that's why the conversation with high availability would start with how many nines? How many nines, right? The second one is the mean time to recovery. This is the average time it will take to either recover, repair, or restore. In fact, that mean time to R, That R could be mean time to recover, mean time to repair, mean time to restore a failed system. Okay? This is another metric for high availability, the mean time between failures. This is the predicted elapsed time between inherent failures of a mechanical or electronic system during normal system operations. And you start to see that there's a little bit of disconnect with what we have here. Okay? I have an issue with this. My biggest issue with this is the fact that we're already measuring something when we don't even have anything. That is my biggest issue. I don't know if you agree, but in cases where you're still in the drawing board, you're still having this conversation with the CIO, the CTO, your manager, the entire IT team, you're already talking about metrics when you don't even have anything yet. And I like using analogies like, for instance, you're already talking about the maximum speed limit when you're driving when you don't even have a driver's license yet, or you don't even have a car yet. It's weird how people would have this talks about, yeah, we need to have a high availability solution, but we need 5 nines. 5 nines for what? We don't even have anything. You only make sense of these metrics if you already have something. Like, you can only measure something if you already have something. How can you measure length if you don't even have anything to measure length against? How can you measure weight if you don't even know what to measure, right? How many kilos of? Well, I don't know. What are we trying to measure here? Okay. And that's my biggest issue with this. We're looking at metrics that don't make sense until we have something. And on the flip side, the frustration is you already have something. Maybe a consultant comes in, builds a high availability solution, but then when you start to measure these numbers, we're like, oh, every week we're having an outage. Or every time the network guys would perform maintenance, we lose our databases. Not my problem, but they blame me, right? Every time our secondary replica is patched by the Windows guys, we lose the databases. It was their fault. I get the blame. And how do we achieve 5 nines or 4 nines or even 3 nines? You don't. And that's why you really need to be clear on the definitions first. Now, these are the metrics that I start with, because these ones, whether you're in the design, the building phase, or you're in operations phase, they would make sense. The first one is a recovery point objective. You've heard me say this so many times in the past in the weekly Q&A sessions. I focus on this. This just simply answers the question, how much data can you afford to lose? And you would hear people in upper management tell you, we want 0 data loss. I just prefixed this presentation earlier by saying there is no such thing as 0 downtime and 0 data loss. This simply is just a question of how much data loss can you tolerate. That should be the starting point of the conversation for any high availability solution. Okay, we start with that. Let's have an example here. Your recovery point. So let's say we have today, 28th of January, 11 o'clock. No, it's not 11 o'clock. 11 o'clock in the morning, and then something went wrong. Your databases become unavailable. Your recovery point objective means that you should have your data as of 9 a.m., which means you have to have your data that looks like how it was at 9 a.m. Sure, you may have lost a bit of data, 2 hours worth, but that's what everybody agreed upon. And that's what this whole recovery point objective is to give everyone a starting point of what everybody agreed on. Because if we're meeting the expectation, then we know we're good. Okay? Even in the design phase, when you're looking at possible data loss of 2 hours as far as a recovery point objective is concerned, you start to think about, so what features can we use in order to achieve this goal? Okay. In most cases, we're already talking about the features when we don't even know what the goal is. That's why we always start with the goal. And this is the first one. The second goal is recovery time objective. And again, you've heard me say this a couple of times in the previous Q&A sessions. What is recovery time objective? This simply answers the question, how much downtime can you afford? Again, most people in upper management will say, I want zero downtime. Again, there is no such thing as zero downtime. Even big companies like Facebook and Amazon and Microsoft, they've had their outages. They've had their downtime, right? You don't just feel it, but they do have their downtime. And of course, when they do have their downtime and the whole world feels it, it turns out to be a 12-hour downtime. And these are massively large companies that have deep enough pockets to spend on keeping their infrastructure up and running. This is just a question that you need to ask. And if you want to rephrase this, how much downtime can you tolerate? That's all it is. And it's more than just hardware failure. Some people think about hardware failure. When your servers break, when your hard drives fail, nobody thinks about when your sysadmins or your DBAs or you start to panic. That includes the downtime. I've seen so many cases where an outage happened and the senior guys on the team just froze because they've never experienced anything like that. They built this massively complex architecture and then they didn't practice their DR exercises. How do you deal with those? And we never measure people panicking, people going through panic attacks and anxiety and stress as they go through these disasters. And so we never factor them in there. So we'll use the same example earlier, but this time we'll look at recovery time objectives. If something happened today at 11 o'clock in the morning, it will require that you be able to bring the system back online within 2 hours from that time on. So that's 11 p.m. Thinking about that, the minute that an outage starts, the clock is already ticking. You can't just decide, hey, do I research this? Do I Google? No, the assumption here is you already know what you need to do, and you already are aware of what the next steps would be. That's how important this is. That's why I said nobody ever factors in human condition. Nobody factors in somebody having a panic attack or anxiety attacks when something goes wrong and they've never seen anything like it before. They don't know the phone numbers to call. They don't know who to escalate to because they've never done it before. But this is part of your recovery time objective. The third metric that I look at is service level agreement. This is just simply a conversation between you, stakeholders, you, the service providers, answering the question, what are we agreeing on? And I say service providers because your network connectivity is dependent on, if you're on a different data center, dependent on your network service provider. Maintenance of your networks is dependent on the network guys. Do the network guys understand that there is an SLA for the database? What about the cluster? The cluster is being patched by your Windows guys, or the operating system is being taken care of by the Windows guys. Do they understand that there is an SLA for the database? Because if they're not aware of it, then you raise a ticket, you call them, nobody wants to answer because it's not my problem, and they can just ignore. Sure, it's your problem, but they caused it. So everybody on the team has to be aware of what this service level agreement is all about. What did we agree on? What did your vendor tell you about their service level agreement? What are we promising? And this is not just between the teams within the IT department. What did the DBA team agree on when it comes to taking care of the operating system? What did the Windows team agree on when it comes to servicing the cluster? What did the networks team? But this goes beyond that. It's you promising the end users. Was there an expectation? Because if there is no expectation, there will always be assumptions. If there is no expectation, there will always be assumptions. But if there is a set expectation and it's on a piece of paper that everybody agrees on, or an email, then you can always tell them this is the expectation. I remember one of the outages from a couple of years ago with AWS, and large enterprises were affected by the outage, and they were surprised when Amazon simply said, "Yeah, we're just going to refund you for the charges that were incurred during the time of the outage." I mean, come on, we lost X amount of dollars, and you're only going to refund me for the charges? Well, that's what the SLA said, but nobody read that until after the incident. Think about that for a second. Because these are the parameters that you have to work with in your conversation with the stakeholders, conversation with the people who would build the system, including you, conversation with your customers, whoever's going to use the system, because this is setting the right expectations. Okay. And addressing both recovery point, recovery time, and SLA require money. And that's why when people start asking about zero downtime and zero data loss, I always give them this graph. The closer you are to zero downtime and zero data loss, the go. Hopefully you can hear me now. Hey Mark, how are you? Uh, I don't know what happened there. The sound, I think I touched the, hopefully you can hear me now. There we are. And so uh, I kind of have these 3 Ds for high availability. And these are what I use as a metric whenever I design and deploy high availability solutions. Great, that's great to hear. If you can hear me now, yeah, hopefully the audio thing doesn't happen again. And this is what SQL Server cannot do for you. Right? SQL Server can have all of these features. It can have SQL Server can have all of these technical benefits. But these 3Ds are the things that SQL Server can never do for you. What are they? The first one is define. I talked about recovery point, I talked about recovery time objectives and service level agreements. These are some things, these are things that SQL Server can never define for you. You start with what the business needs. Not what you want, or what the business needs. Start with that. This is the starting point for this. Okay. Uh, Audio is not as good, so let me see if I can. I don't know. Oh, that's probably why. Hopefully, you can hear me better now. There we are. Hopefully, you can hear me better. Okay, good. And thanks for the feedback. The thing is, sometimes this whole thing disconnects me from my audio and it doesn't resume everything. Okay, so start with the business needs. You have to define that. And these are stuff like your recovery point, your recovery time, and your SLA. It is not our job to do this, but it is our responsibility to have the conversation started. Get the conversation started. Have your manager talk to the business stakeholders. If your manager does not understand this, bring everyone who has the responsibility to make decisions to get to the conversation. As on, they want to define, or they want to plus yet. There we are. I have no clue what is going on with. There we are. And just like I said, when they want a high availability solution, they would hire a consultant, bring someone in, and then when the consultant leaves, they're on their own trying to do whatever is needed in order to keep that solution up and running. And so this is where more problems are introduced rather than having something that would actually solve problems. Let me see. My audio. Okay, good. And this is where the problems would start happening, because nobody is capable enough to manage this infrastructure that they built. It's just like, yeah, we want to join the Formula One race, and you are getting mechanics from the neighborhood. No, you need competent people who are skillful enough to manage these availability solutions. And of course, budget is key here. When people think about budget, they only think about the licensing cost, the hardware cost. They're thinking about support cost. They don't think about having people to manage this. That is going to be a part. That is going to be a part of your cost calculations. Okay, that's the first D, and we need to understand the business. The one thing that I keep hearing sysadmins and DBAs say is, well, I don't know what the business is doing. All I know is I need to take care of the databases. I need to make sure that the backups are running. I need to make sure the cluster is running. If we don't understand the business, we're simply doing one piece and potentially doing something that could disrupt the overall business operation. Be very clear about the reasons why you're implementing high availability solutions in the first place. Why? Is it supporting a business need? Is it there so that you can support an operational business? Will the high availability solution cause the business to lose revenue in case it becomes unavailable? I remember when Facebook had its outage a couple of months ago. I think this was sometime October. Calculated around $13 million of revenue loss just from that outage alone. And so you have to be aware of what is going on when these things start to happen. You don't need to know the whole business. You just need to know what is the impact of what I'm doing to the business. That way you have an understanding of what is it that I need to do, or in your case, what is it that you need to do in order to fully support the business operations. Okay, that's the first D. The second D is to decide on the best solution, based on the results of the definition. And the key thing here is, first, knowing what the solution is. And if you know what the solution, you know what the business requirement is, then it is easy to choose between which features. But it has to start with the definition first, right? It's just like saying you're a brand new driver and you want to drive a Ferrari. Well, you haven't, you just got your learner's permit and you want to drive a Ferrari. Something doesn't add up. Okay? And that's also something that you have to consider, because when you start choosing features first without understanding what the business requirements are, you end up, again, buying a Ferrari, but you can't even drive it. Or you drive a Ferrari and then you start crashing because you don't know how to handle it. That is important. Yeah, you start talking about the solution. Is it an always-on availability group? Is it a failover clustered instance? Would database mirroring be okay? It's deprecated, but it is not considered unsupported. Would log shipping be okay? Would backup, copy, and restore be fine, right? And then you schedule the time when you would do the implementation, schedule the time that you would do the, schedule the time that you would use to maintain the solution. That is part of it, right? And then, again, budget. The features that you would choose should depend on the business requirement, but the features that you use end up costing you something. Good thing with SQL Server 2016 Service Pack 2, I believe, that Microsoft made some of the high availability features available in Standard Edition. Like basic availability groups is made available in Standard Edition with SQL Server 2016. But the thing is, don't just look at one portion of the budget. Don't just look at the licensing cost. Don't just look at the hardware cost. You have to look at the overall cost of maintaining that thing. You don't buy a car now and just think about the price of the car. You worry about, you have to think about, oh, if I'm a new driver, I need to get driving lessons. What about insurance? What about maintenance? What about oil change, tires? All of these things factor into, oh, by the way, your maintenance cost will include you paying the mechanic. These are all part of the budget conversations, because without these, you're only fixated on features, okay? And then you have your skill set. I could not overemphasize this. You don't want to be driving a Ferrari and not know how to drive a Ferrari, okay? And then what do you want to insource or outsource? Sure, you decide, hey, this is something that we really need. This is something that we, the business, needs, but we don't have in-house capabilities and skill set to do this. Maybe you can hire a consultant to do this for you. But you have to think about the skill set of the consultant and the skill set of the people who would end up managing this when the consultant leaves and hands over the solution to you. That is something that you have to keep thinking about, okay? Because I've seen so many cases where a consultant would just design a very complex architecture and then leave the team behind and say, oh, not my problem anymore. That's your responsibility now. And then the team managing it does not know how to deal with it because it's so complex, okay? And then processes. I cannot overemphasize the importance for process, because this is not a one-man team. Building a high availability solution is not a one-man team. So you need to have processes in place. If something happens to the database and it was caused by a network outage, who do you reach out to? If something went wrong with the operating system and it's not the DBA who's responsible for that, how do you escalate? These are processes that you have to be aware of, right? And then the final D is do. What do I mean by do? Do, the only way to achieve results is to take action. This is you not prolonging the conversation. And I remember having had clients from a couple of years ago where they have been talking about, and I say talking about because the planning, the conversations, all of that took years. to a point where if you start looking at the frequency of SQL Server version releases, SQL Server has already been gone through like 2 versions, and they're still talking about having a high availability solution. There is no point in talking about something if you're not going to do anything about it, because talk is cheap, right? The only way to achieve results is to take action. And you have to consider implementing that solution. You've gone through having a design, you've gone through the conversation with the business stakeholders, you've gone through all of these things. So now you have a blueprint on how to implement. Now it's go time. Take that blueprint, get the team to implement it. If you're part of that team, make sure you know exactly what you need to do. You're clear on what you need to do, and the solution is solid. What I mean by solid is that it's not just designed just for the sake of somebody getting that thing written on their resume. This is not something that you just put on your resume. This is something that could literally spell life and death. And I say that because I've seen environments where the design of an availability group is causing more issues. And if you are an emergency system, meaning you're the back end database for a 911 system, that literally means or spells the difference between life and death. So you implement a solid solution. Okay. What else? Monitor. Last week, I talked about monitoring high availability solutions. Go watch the recording for that. And I answered a bunch of questions. The thing about this is people decide to deploy an HA solution, but they don't have specific monitoring tools for their SQL Server high availability solution. Sure, they've got infrastructure-wide monitoring solutions, but nothing specific to availability groups, or nothing specific to SQL Server, or nothing specific to failover clustered instances. You have got to have something that is very specific. The more critical your system is, the more that you have something specific for that system, right? And then you create operational procedures, escalation process. Do your operations team simply create tickets, and how long does it take for them to create a ticket to the resolution? Are you meeting your recovery time objectives and SLA as you resolve an issue? So let's say it is an outage. How do you deal with that? Will the operations simply escalate it to the senior engineers, or do they take a stab at it first? And if in the first 10 minutes they couldn't solve it, they escalate it. These are operational process that you have to bake into your entire team's operational procedures. And then issue resolution and escalation. Okay. I'm sure you've been burned by the fact that everything's just getting escalated to you, even though there's level 1 escalation team that needs to be resolved. But because they don't even bother solving those problems first, they would just escalate things to you, even if it's just a simple, a SQL Server agent job failed and it's on alert. They just escalate it to you, right? Have issue resolution and escalation process in place as well. Then you train your staff. This is more than just training them on the technical aspects, because the technical skill training is easy. But if they're not doing it, meaning sure, they know how to do it, they've been trained, but they're not doing it on a regular basis, they will forget. The key with training is mastery. In an emergency situation, you're not supposed to be thinking about what to do. In an emergency situation, you're simply deciding, this is what I need to do, and I need to do it quick, which means you've already practiced that a ton of times. That's where your DR strategy comes in. This is where your escalation procedure should come in. But if you don't have one, or even worse, you have one, but you haven't even tried it yet, like I said in the beginning, nobody measures anxiety, panic attacks, and stress-related issues when we're doing stuff like, I need to recover my databases. Nobody measures that. But if you haven't done anything like it yet, and this is the first time you're doing it, I can guarantee you will be freaking out. I did. I remember I did. And that's just human nature. It's just reality. Okay? And then you test your solution in a non-production environment, of course. And then when you roll it out in production, you have your DR strategy. Make sure that your DR strategy is tested on a regular basis. Of course, we're assuming that you do, excuse me, you do have a DR strategy. If you don't, then that's probably the first thing that you have to start looking at. Okay. Remember, I started this presentation with the story of me looking at a snowblower, and I realized, wait a second. What if I'm not here? What if I'm traveling during the winter season? So how do I deal with that? And that's when I decided I would just hire out my snow clearing activities during the winter, so that I don't really have to take care of it. And this is something that a lot of people, especially us DBAs, technical professionals, who would think, no, it has to be me. I've got to do it. It's kind of like I have to be the one to do it. But if it's taking you longer and it's causing you a lot of issues just trying to figure it out on your own, and the Microsoft documentation is not helping at all, then it becomes problematic even. Might as well just hire somebody who's really good at doing this. Of course, you don't just hire anybody to do this. You hire somebody who has a really good track record, that he has built something like this. It is not a complex system, because the reality is the more complex something is, the more it is difficult to maintain. And he's not just going to leave you on your own to try and figure things out on your own. I couldn't count the number of times when a consultant would come in, build the solution, then leave, and then all hell breaks loose, because he built the availability group solution or the failover clustered instance based on his understanding, not knowing that the people who are left behind will be the one managing it. And so there was no handover, there was no training, there was no documentation available. This is very important. That's why, again, you can decide to do it on your own, or you can shorten the path, shorten the time to do it. And in summary, though, just to wrap this whole thing up, in summary, always start with a why. Why are you building a high availability solution in the first place? Is it because Microsoft told you to build a 3-node failover cluster with a 3-replica availability group, where 2 replicas are on your production and 1 on your DR site? Is that because? Is it because your manager heard a speaker from Microsoft talks about always on, and now you want that, or he wants it, and you got voluntold to do it? Is it because it's the new thing and you can put it on your resume? Is it because this is what the business really needs? That's why you have to start with the why. And when everybody is clear on the why, then you know that every step along the building, in the maintenance, in the operation, and even the troubleshooting, everybody's clear on the expectations. If you have not defined your recovery point and recovery time objectives and your service level agreements yet, and you already have a high availability solution in place, it is time for you to start writing those down and letting everybody know about it. If you are thinking about building a high availability solution and you don't know where to start, this is the first place to start. Understanding and defining your recovery point or recovery time objectives and service level agreements. But then if you still feel like, I don't really know how to go about this, then it's time for you to really consider, what is the cost in order to build a high availability solution? Do we have the right people in place? Do we have the right process in place? Do we have what we need in order to make this happen? Because if you don't, then it's going to take longer. It is going to take more effort. It is going to be more complex until that project stretches. Here's the worst thing that can happen. You build something and you end up causing or having more issues. The solution caused more problems that it is solving, and now you're not sleeping because you have to deal with outages over and over and over again. You would have to deal with writing an RCA. You would have to explain something, pretending that you know exactly what went wrong, and then you tell the CEO that this is exactly what happened, and you start to feel like your job is at risk because you don't know what to do next. Okay, these are the things that you have to consider. And if you need help with SQL Server always on availability groups or failover clustered instance or any SQL Server high availability and disaster recovery solution, use that link on the screen. Reach out, schedule a call with me, and I'll be happy to guide you through the process of getting that project um, dealt with. There's no sense in trying to figure things out on your own if somebody already did it for you. I mean, you could do it if you want, but it's going to take you much longer. It's going to take you more time, more effort, more resources until you're not even sure whether or not what you've deployed is something that's stable. That's a huge thing. Stability, reliability, and availability. That should be the metric once everything is up and running. How stable is it? How reliable? How available is it? And if you're getting outages after outages on a regular basis, then it's no point. It's no wonder why people abandon their projects even after deploying it in production, because they're not sure and it's causing more problems. The reality is they just didn't get really clear on what they wanted with it in the first place. And so the way they deployed it was just based on someone else's definition, someone else's recommendation, but they were not really clear on it. Again, if you need help with anything SQL Server high availability and disaster recovery, use that link, schedule a call with me, and let's have that conversation. And with a 30, 45-minute conversation, we can get really, really clear on what your goals are. We'll get really clear on what the problems you're facing and start addressing them immediately, right? And then help you get have the solution that you need for those problems that you've encountered on your SQL Server high availability solution. All right, and that is about it for this. And my apologies for all the audio issues. Maybe it's time for me to get a new MacBook. Yes, next week. Anyway, tune in again next week for another weekly Q&A session. And if you do have questions that you want answered during the Q&A sessions, send them over. There's a link down below where you can submit your questions. There's a Google form so that we can address them in the next week's Q&A session. Also, you have links and resources available that you can watch previous recordings of this. And that's about it for today. Join me again next week for another practical SQL Server HADR show episode. Maybe I should start calling it an episode. And enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'll see you again next week. Goodbye.